All right, I'll kick us off here. And so thanks everyone for coming. Hopefully I'm sharing a PowerPoint screen right now and that it's in presentation mode. Jeff, can you confirm that for us? Awesome. Yeah, so we're really excited to be here. We're going to talk about rethinking education premiums. We're going to talk about some credentialing, debt, and then skills in a dynamic economy. And so we're really excited to be here. We want to thank the Lumina Foundation for supporting us in this work. I also want to thank a few of my collaborators who are here with us today, who are going to be presenting a few of our papers as well. So this is me. We have Guangli Zhang, and then we also have Yung Chun. So we're going to have a kind of a packed group here, and we're going to talk through some of the things that we found. So I'm going to kick us off, and I'm going to first talk about one of our first analysis that really looked at the difference in education credentials and what that means for economic outcomes and how we kind of think about these things more broadly. So I'll start with the problem and we'll end with the solution here. So one of the key problems that we have is that there's a really large and growing number of non-degree credentials between a high school diploma and a bachelor's degree, as well as degree programs beyond that. However, if we look at the research landscape and our policy landscape, we often find that research on the financial returns is pretty narrow and pretty siloed. And so again, I think our goal here is to be able to provide some evidence on the comparative nature and the relative nature of non-degree credentials and what that looks like. So how do we do that? We leverage a large national sample of individuals across 9 MSAs and 4 industries, and we examine some of the relative financial returns to a variety of both non-degree credentials and degree programs and kind of put those in context in the same model. So we have data, our outcome data is from a large credit bureau containing observed income from payroll. And then we worked really closely with the National Student Clearinghouse and able to really connect a variety of different degrees and credentials to these long-term economic outcome data. A little bit about our sample. So we have individuals who had some observed income in the past 7 years. We focused on 4 different industries: education, manufacturing, STEM, and healthcare. And then we did have folks from 9 different regions, each corresponding to a census division. And finally, we focused on folks who were born in 1981 and after. Okay, so a little bit about some of our outcomes and what our treatments are. So our outcome is gross income. We measure that consecutively over the span of 7 years. Our treatment, we're going to break down our credentials into 2 different types. So we have school-based certificates. These are credentials that are offered from universities and other colleges. And then we also have non-school-based certificates. And this is a growing area of data for the National Student Clearinghouse. And so we were really excited and kind of grateful to partner with them on this initiative. Then we have associate's degrees, bachelor's, master's, doctor's, and professional degrees. And our comparison group here is high school degree holders. And we use the NICS codes for our industry identifiers. We use the difference in difference model. So again, we're comparing folks with similar pretreatment trend lines and kind of looking at these outcomes over time. I'll be happy to talk a little bit more about that later on, but this is our main analytical model for this first paper. Okay, so we have school-based certificates, and again, these are all of our different models. So we model school-based certificates, associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and doctoral degrees. And I'm going to walk through what our findings are. But before I do that, I want to get us to think a little bit about what we might expect. What do we really think is going to be the marginal returns to additional schooling? I think on the left is probably what we have commonly conceptualized as what we expect in terms of number of years of education. We see a linear increase in income for more years of schooling. If we think about what that looks like sequentially, so imagine everyone did their degree programs in different sequences. So an associate's degree, then they went from an associate's to a bachelor's degree, from a bachelor's to a master's, and so forth. We may see some distribution in earnings like this. And then finally, we know that for most people that earn bachelor's degree, they actually don't do an associate's degree. And so we may expect to see some sort of return that looks a little bit like this. And so this is what I think some of the theories are around what we might expect to see. And this is what we actually found. So I'm going to walk through a couple of the key findings here. I think one thing we were really interested to see is in our second bar, these are the non-school-based certificates. And we see that these folks who actually complete these earn more than folks that complete a 2-year associate's degree. And so again, we see I would call this more earnings for less time, right? So we see this like really strong increase in earnings for both school-based and non-school-based certificates, but even in our non-school-based certificates, we see really large increases for those, especially relative to time, right? So we think about the time that folks are investing, and we see some really large gains for these non-school certificates. At the same time, we also see some really large benefits and increases for bachelor's degrees. And so if you can see here, when we look at BA degree, again, if we think about the time it takes to complete a BA degree, twice that of an associate's degree, we might expect to see a level of earnings increases that is twice that, but it actually is almost 3 to 4 times as large as that. And again, so these are kind of two of our main findings initially. If we just like look at the aggregate earnings, we see an outsized role of earnings for folks in certificates and especially non-school certificates. And then again, we see some really strong earnings for bachelor's degree holders as well, and as well as advanced degrees. But what does this look like over time? And I think like this is one of the places that we were really interested to look at and see how these trajectories look over time. I think when people are making decisions on what type of education they're going to pursue, it really is not so much how much am I going to earn in the next year. Again, we have lots of evidence that shows that people that attain some sort of educational degree or credential, they tend to earn more coming out. But what does that look like in the long haul? Like, what does this look like in an extended period of time? So for our analysis, we looked at these earnings increases over time. And again, I think there were some things that were surprising. When we look at our bachelor's degrees and our master's degrees and our doctoral degrees, and these are the top 3 lines here, we see that it's not just that folks are experience a quick elevator ride up, right? Like some strong earnings increases in the year after. But we see that those continue to grow, especially for some of our doctoral degree holders as well as our master's degree holders. So again, like this idea of increased earnings trajectories over time. And I think that's important for folks to know. As we look at our non-school based and our school-based certificates, we do see some quick increases, so some quick bumps in earnings, but they tend to flatten out over time. I think one of the policy implications here could be the idea of like stacking. So if we can imagine folks who are pursuing these sort of shorter term credentials and certificates, is there an opportunity to stack these on top of each other so that it's not just a quick elevator ride followed by a walkway, but some continual escalators up to social mobility? And so I think this is one of the things that we were really interested to find and excited to see here. I'll talk a little bit about implications before I turn it to Guangli. So one of the ideas that we had, for policymakers is definitely the need to increase funds for non-degree credential programs. Again, writ large, we saw some really, large increases relative to the time it takes for students to complete these programs. We think that's an important policy lever in terms of being able to provide funding for these. At the same time, like we can't ignore that there are some really large increases with bachelor degree programs. The ways in which we can provide and increase access to those things, I think, is going to be really important. And I also think we need a little bit more transparency in reporting for financial outcomes for graduates, right? As students are kind of considering making the choices for what they're going to do in terms of their post-secondary education opportunities, I think the more that they can be aware of both what the immediate and then long-term earnings outcomes can look like, I think that's both a fair thing to do and also can lead to some optimal decision making. I think one of the things that this keep coming up here is this idea of like ensuring quality. So I'm presenting aggregate findings from a really large database from the National Student Clearinghouse. It's exhaustive for associate's degrees and ups. It's not yet exhaustive for non-degree credentials. But even so, these are aggregate findings. So I think like there's going to be different levels of returns, based on the specific credential or degree program. And Yung's going to talk a little bit about some of these things in the last presentation. And then finally, I think, ways in which we can leverage existing education institutions such as community college to support more holistic workforce development programs, I think is going to be key. So even though we saw the largest increase for the non-degree credential programs outside of universities, we know from some current research that universities are able to sometimes provide these supporting mechanisms that help folks persist through these. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can't control for, but also pass it to Guangli. So I think one of the key things that we couldn't control for here is how much time and money people are investing. So again, we know we have a good sense of how long these degree programs take. But we know that students are taking on different amounts of debt for different degree programs, and I think that's going to be like really important for us as we consider the policy mechanisms. The other thing is that for us, we're really providing a descriptive analysis here, and then I'm going to kick it to Guangli, who's going to provide some causal results based on identifying a comparison group of non-completers. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to pass to Guangli and stop sharing.
All right, can everyone see my screen? All right, awesome. So today I'm going to present the second paper in this agenda, Beyond Earnings Premium, Debt-Adjusted Return to Post-Secondary Education. Just to motivate this research, much of the prior work tend to focus on the earnings premium, which is the pure gross return to education. But when considering education decisions, another crucial parameter to consider is the cost of borrowing. So essentially, this paper reassessed the economic return to education by essentially integrating those two elements, which is student loan payments into the post-completion earnings. So why does this matter? So obtaining degree is rewarding, but it's increasingly more expensive. So from the left-hand side, you can see that there's this rising average student debt over the past decade. This is based on data from Institute for College Access and Success.
Yeah, this has already got a label.
And just to give you some concrete numbers, in 2019,
somebody's got their mic on. Turn it off.
I hope. Yes.
Okay. 26% of the graduate had debts, and that averaged about $29,000 for individual students. So the main question of this study is that is the higher education still worthwhile after we account for student debt? Oops. So just to quickly overview our key findings. Our first finding show that even after including loan payments, return to degree completion remain positive and significant. So just to give you some numbers, after accounting degree completion, after accounting student loan payments, the adjusted premium, adjusted return is $8,000 every year. And before adjustment, the gross return is about $10,000. And the second finding is that loan burden accounts for about 23% of the gross return past completion, and over time it declines. So just to quickly about the background and the context of this paper. So there's growing financial pressure, there's rising tuition, declining public investment, and the debt is unevenly distributed. It varies by degree type, industry, race, and some backgrounds. But we don't have a concrete number of like which group is more disadvantaged in this setting. So we use the same data sources. From the education side, we use National Student Clearinghouse for enrollment completion, degree discontinuation, their major, and where they attend their degree, obtain their degree. And from the other student loan side of the data, we use credit bureau data that has information on student loan trade lines, the amounts, and how they make their payments. And in addition, we have information on their employment and income. So to construct our main analytical sample, just to give you an overview of the numbers, we have about 22,000 individuals, and about 15,000 completers. Those are individuals who completed any degree during our sample period. And we matched those individuals to about 6,800 individuals who enrolled but didn't complete. And we draw the sample from the same 9 MSAs over 4 industries. And the matching essentially pairs non-completers with multiple completers by institution MSA, their major and enrollment cohort. So the main outcome of interest, before that, just quickly about how we construct the student loan measure. So we allow for plus minus 6 months around the enrollment termination time window. So any loan that initiated during that time period will be counted towards that specific degree. And then to construct the loan adjusted return, our main measure is just the gross income minus the observed student loan payments and the yearly level. And for robustness, since we also have information on total loan amounts, we can compute the amortized payments, assuming 10-year standard length of the loan and 4% interest. Yeah, so our main empirical strategy utilizes this two-way fixed effect model where we control for matching pair fixed effects, so making a comparison within each matched pair, and also calendar year fixed effect, which takes care of the time trends. And to interpret this regression, we essentially compares the income change of completers versus non-completers within the same institution, metro area of where they work, their major, their enrollment cohort, while controlling for year shocks. And beta essentially is the effect of completing a credential on loan adjusted earnings relative to otherwise similar students who didn't complete. And we also run an event study, which is essentially a more dynamic version of the fixed effect models, and that beta E traces how this loan adjusted income changes over time. So this is the result on the two-way fixed effect models. The main takeaway is 23% of the earnings premium are student loan payments. So if you look at the top panel, the fourth column, that is our preferred specification. The return is about $10,000 and for gross income as the outcome. And this is the loan adjusted outcome, which is about $8,000. And this is the event study. So everything is relative to -1 year, which is relative to the year before they complete their degree. And you can see that there's a shrinking gap in between adjusted income and gross income, or actually it should be adjusted return and gross return. So some of the implications, first, we find that higher ed remains a worthwhile investment on average, given that we find significant and positive return even after adjusting for student loan payments. But student loan burden is about 23% of the gross return premium. So maybe there is some incentive to potentially reduce this burden through some policy instruments to incentivize people to complete their degree to complete their degree. And in the paper, we outlined 4 different policy recommendations that includes maintain and expand loan access, promote income-driven repayments, address non-degree debt risks, and innovate use like fintech or other solutions to reduce costs. And this paper also has some limitations. First, that is mainly because of our sample is it requires people to be employed in the credit data. So our sample may underrepresent those with self-employment and those who doesn't have any credit score. And there are other unobserved factors that we cannot control for. I guess we partly control for, which is academic preparation and ability. We kind of address the ability using high school fixed effects, which is essentially controlling individuals where high schools where they completed their high school. And then scope of the analysis also has some limitation. So we focus on financial returns only, but it doesn't really capture non-pecuniary benefits such as health and civic engagement. So just to wrap up before I turn this to Yon, the main takeaway, as we stated in the paper, is that it's better to complete with loans than to not complete it at all. Yeah, now I'm gonna pass it down to Yon. I'll stop share.
I like the picture.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, good.
Okay, stop.
Now let me share my screen. Everybody see my?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let me start. So hi, my name is Jungcheon from WashU, and today I will be presenting findings from two connected studies that ask a common question. So how does education and credentials translate into real economic and social mobility? So the first study looks at the labor market side, so whether people work in job aligned with their education and how much that alignment matters to for studies look at the geographic side. So after earning a credential or the degrees, do people move? Where do they move? And what does that mean for neighborhood opportunity and equality? So these studies shows that education's value isn't just about the credentials, and it's also about how it's used in the labor market and how it shapes where people live and build their lives. And importantly, the benefits are not evenly shared. They differ by race, degree, geography, and market. And let me start with the first paper on job skill alignment. Education generally boosts earnings, but the size of the boost depends a lot on what you studied and what job you end up in. A key factor is what we call horizontal mismatch, so working outside your field of study. So past research has mostly described mismatch rates, but we have little causal evidence of its impacts on earnings. So that's what we address here. So our questions are very straightforward. So the first question is, how does the working outside your field affect your earnings? And are the returns equitable across gender and race? And the returns differ by grade, degree level, or the field of study, or the market situation. So the researchers have used different approaches to measure mismatch. Subject surveys, like measuring the satisfaction, or the objective crosswalk using the compare the curricula and the job requirements, and indirect proxies like the tenures or income. In our study, we link measures to jobs using national data sets that connect academic fields to occupation to the industry. And this allows us to calculate the probability that graduates from a given major actually work in unexpected industries. So alignment is expressed as a share of graduate in a field that matches their studies. So one of the limitations of past studies is its weak causal inferences. To address this, we used an instrumental variable model with a Bartik instrument. Without going into technical details, the idea is simple. We leverage national shifts in industry demand, combined with the local share of the demand, to isolate the causal effects of alignment on earnings. So what do we find? Each model estimates the elasticity of alignment on earning. And in the second column, which is our preferred model specification, you see that the elasticity measure is almost 0.9. So what does that mean? So the 10% increase in alignment, like 40% to the 44%, raises annual income by nearly 9%. To put this perspective, that is about the same as the return to an additional year of schooling, so typically estimate between 7 to 10%. In other words, alignment itself matters as much as staying in school longer. But not everyone benefits equally. So the Black graduates capture weaker returns than alignment, you can see here, highlighting the persistent inequality in how education translates into earnings. The alignment matters more at the higher level of degree, like when you see the AA degree to BA, MA, and doctoral, like the master and PhD. And the returns are larger in tighter labor market than compared to the select one. So the big picture is this. Alignment pays off, but the benefits are uneven. A 10% increase in alignment is worth nearly 9% raise, but who captures those gains depends on race, degree level, and market context. So what does this mean to the policy and practice? It means that it provides students with clearer information about how measures connect to their jobs and pay, and strengthen partnership between college and employers to create pipelines into aligned work. And because benefits are uneven, support targeted equity strategies such as mentoring, recruitment pipelines, and stronger anti-discrimination enforcement to ensure all students benefit. And now let's turn to the second paper, which is titled, Does Education Attainment Impact Geographic and Social Mobility? This study shifts from the jobs to neighborhoods, asking how education shapes where people move and what that means for opportunities. Education promotes upward mobility, but not just through wages. Where graduates move, whether across regions or within a metro, also matters. So moves reshape neighborhood income, diversity, and education level, and these patterns are racialized. So white and BIPOC graduates take different pathways. So we ask, does earning a credential or the degree increase the likelihood of moving across and within regions? And for movers, how do these pathways affect neighborhood outcomes like income, diversity, and brain drain? So to answer this, we linked degree data with the credit bureau records on income, employment, and most importantly, residential locations. We used a panel difference and difference design with lagged outcomes and examined subgroups by race and education level. So what do we find? So advanced degrees, bachelor's and above, spur inter-regional mobility in the immediate year after graduation. You can see here that we see the spike of the bachelor's inter-mobility, like in white bars for bachelor's and MAs, and strikingly doctor degrees, which means like after graduating doctor degrees, people are more likely to move from, for example, like the St. Louis, Missouri to the New York or the New Jersey or the San Francisco. We also see the lagged effect within regional mobility tends to rise 2 or 3 years later, reflecting slower process of the residential attainment. If you see the left chart, you see that there's some gradual increase of the probability of the mobility. And our next question is, how are these moves linked to the neighborhood outcomes? The figures here shows that the changes in median neighborhood income level after graduate relocations. So the white graduates, the clearest gain come from the inter-regional moves, moving to a different metro of the state. So these moves often land them in wealthier neighborhoods, places like the moving from a St. Louis, Missouri to the New York, or the New Brunswick to the San Francisco. By contrast, intra-regional moves staying within the same metro tend to be horizontal, with little changes in neighborhood income. This suggests that the long-distance moves are the main way white graduates translate education into the improved residential attainment. For BIPOC graduates on the right, the pattern is almost reversed. Their intra-regional moves are the one most strongly associated with the higher income neighborhoods. In other words, staying within the metro boundary but shifting to a new neighborhood is a key pathway for BIPOC graduates to improve their residential attainment. So these patterns matter for the local economy. So the inter-regional moves may redistribute the talent across the regions, but the inter-regional moves can directly contribute to the neighborhood level economic changes. So for the white graduate, opportunity is unlocked by leaving, while for the BIPOC graduates, it is often realized by the repositioning within the same region. So both highlight how education shapes mobility, but along very different racialized pathway. Mobility also changes neighborhood diversity. So y-axis here shows the changes in the share of people of color in destination neighborhoods after graduation, a graduate move. For white graduates, which is left, who moves within the same metro areas, we see a consistent shift into more racially diverse neighborhoods. You see that many of the white bar is above the zero. While these moves can bring new investment in amenities, they also, and this pattern is especially strong among the master's and doctoral degree holders. You can see here. This aligns with the dynamics of the gentrification. Educated white movers entered historically under-resourced or the racially mixed neighborhoods. And while these moves can bring new investment and amenities, they also raise housing costs and reshape the social fabric, and often at the expense of the long-standing residents of color. For BIPOC graduates, which is right, the pattern is reversed. Their inter-regional moves are linked to the neighborhoods that are less diverse and more white. So this is particularly pronounced for the advanced degree holders. So while our study doesn't directly map the geography of these moves, the pattern may be related to the suburbanization, or I call it as the color flight, which is come from the white flight, upwardly mobile BIPOC, like the household relocating to the wider suburban areas in search of better schools, safety, or the housing opportunities. So this dynamic shows that the education-driven mobility not only changes economic outcomes, but also reshapes the economic racial geography of metropolitan areas, fueling gentrification in some neighborhoods and suburbanization in others. So the takeaways. So degrees drive mobility, but not equal opportunities. Advanced degrees spur inter-regional moves. Income gains support slower intra-regional moves. White movers patterns align with gentrification, and BIPOC movers patterns align with suburbanizations. The policy needs are clear, so strengthen non-degree programs and community colleges to address local skill gaps and reduce brain drain, and support financial mobility through savings and debt management tools that help graduates afford moves and homeownership, and foster inclusive neighborhood changes. Diversity alone is not enough, and intentional policies must promote integration and inclusion. So to wrap up, the education expands both earnings and geographic horizons, but the benefits are not evenly distributed. Alignment and mobility matters, but who gains depends on field, degree, race, gender, region, or the market. The challenge ahead is to ensure that the education investment translates into equitable economic and social mobility for all. Thank you so much, and let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Yoon. And so we have some time. We definitely want to hear your questions and go there. So I think we'll move into question and answers.
I got a couple of quick questions for you, actually some detail questions, but then a couple of substantive ones. First, are you just doing one-year certificates? That's what it seemed to say on one of your graphs.
Yes. So we, based on our reading, most of the certificate programs in our data set from the National Student Clearinghouse were 1 year. I think there were some that were shorter, and there were some that were a little longer.
Okay, you should take that into consideration for generalizing your findings, because many certificates are outside of the 1 year. I think something like 40-some-odd% are 2 years and below. Another about 50% or more above 2 years. So you're missing a lot talking about certificates in general, I believe. Are you talking about highest attained when you say certificate?
Yes. So when we talk about the certificates, we're thinking about the highest, and like the for us, we look at it as like the most recent. So when in the first paper, we're looking at the last degree or certificate completed controlling for prior degree and prior certificate completion. So we're really focusing on the most recent.
Okay, so do you then are you able to pick up the impact of multiple degrees, I guess is the most substantive question that I have there, because my work looking at certificates, certifications, and others show that people hold these in portfolios. And so a large number of degree holders have a certificate, have certifications, which you would expect maybe to boost earnings at other levels. And so it's trying to figure out if you've investigated that.
Yeah, so we control for it. So essentially in our models, what we're showing is we're controlling for prior certificate completion, but we have not yet examined the impact of earning multiple certificates on top of that. I think that's something where we want to go to next. But as of right now, we're essentially controlling for that.
Yeah, I guess I don't mean multiple certificates. I mean certificates in conjunction with other degrees, which is a really fairly common phenomenon. So just trying to figure that out. But anyways, thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
A lot of shy people, huh?
Sorry, hello. I'm experiencing a little bit of a cold and hoarseness here, but thank you all for some wonderful findings here. I'm only 3 years into higher education, but here in Illinois, working on a in my tenure process, we've been tasked as a healthcare associate's degree here in Illinois. Our Illinois Community College Board is asking us to come up with ways to do CBE. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, competency-based education modules for students or learners. I've been calling them learners to flow through at their own pace. And develop that specifically for healthcare because they've had it in other industries. So we're just now trying to do that here in Illinois. But can we talk a little bit excuse me, about ways to like invest or ideas into invest in creating more non-degree credentials at the community college level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, from this work and some of our other work, we've really thought about like what are the ways in which local employers are currently working with community colleges and how is that informing some of their programming and their offering. And I think when you mentioned some of like the competency-based learning, like there could be an idea of like the ways in which the specific skills translate into that. I think that was one of the main findings from our paper on like mismatches is the idea of like people experience the best social benefit or the best economic benefits when their specific skills match those in their local industry. And so I think this could be an opportunity for businesses and other groups to work a little bit more closely with community colleges. And I also think, to Jung's last point on like we know that these are the folks that are most likely to stay within a region, right? And so when we think about like regions trying to invest in their learners and their future workforce, these are also the folks that are most likely to stay. And so I think like those are in some ways like the public-private partnerships are the hardest thing to scale, but I think that they're probably have the best long-term and immediate and local effects. And so I think that's my sense. We've done a little bit of work on some local reskilling efforts in St. Louis and Missouri. And again, we found through some qualitative analysis that it was the ability for local employers to work really closely with credential providers to make sure that those skills are increased in alignment.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure
Yeah, the last
others
one
may
was
have other
very,
thoughts, but
yeah, no, it was very informative because in my profession, which is actually sleep technology, I've been trying to push my students here in Illinois to once they graduate and get their actual credentials to do travel work. And I've been pushing them outside of just staying in Illinois in the Chicago area. But now I'm guessing depending on the student, incorporating some of this data to say like, hey, it may be more beneficial for one group of people maybe, but for others, just with credentialing alone, it may be better. So I think it's going to be a good dive into that. Thank you for all the information.
thank you. I see it coming from Jeff in the chat. So my most recent read is that some of the interest on student loan payments are tax deductible, but not the actual student loan payments.
Yeah, then I might suggest for communications purposes that you translate it to post-tax disposable income. So you're really talking to people's pocketbooks rather than, not, if I read correctly, you're doing gross earnings. So that just might, just for communications purposes, hit people. The second question I was just typing in here. STEM is commonly an occupational concept, but you present it as an industry. I've not really seen that done. So what do you mean by STEM as an industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we're matching our employment records and our educational records, we're starting on the employment side. And so we're really using the BLS, I think it's the NICS codes to find folks who are working in like the common definition of STEM by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so that's how because we start on the employment side with our data across these 9 MSAs, that's where we start. We want to have enough variety in the industries that we're examining, and so that's how we code that. So we generally use the 4 different industry codes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I think if you're alluding to this, like there are some shortcomings in like what is a STEM, what is a STEM industry, and so that's important to note. I think we can capture more of that in the ways in which we connect the actual degree skills to those industries in one of Jung's papers. But it's a good point. It's not a it's an industry code based on a company starting on the workforce side, and so I think there are some limits in what that actually means.
Yeah, I think you might
Yeah.
consider naming the industries and not call it STEM, because most of the people I know would think of STEM as an occupation and not an industry. And STEM talent is spread across many, many industries, like IT, let's say, or any kind of math skill. They're spread across, and so you might run into people and you say, "What are they talking about?" Where in fact you're
Yeah.
named some. It just might help in a communication. That's all.
Yes, and actually that's a very great point, because the majority of the STEM graduate goes to college and university, which is technically not STEM industry, but it's education field. And then, so because of that issue, what we did for the last paper, which is about the social mobility, third paper, which is about the horizontal alignment and mismatch, what we did is we triangle from the field to occupation using SOC code. And then calculate connecting the SOC code with the NICE code, which is connected to the occupation and then the industries. But for other papers, yeah, definitely we can also consider those kind of options for future study, definitely.
And it's good. I want to just comment on the comment about student debt is really important, because that is how the federal government makes our student debt IDR policies. It's not based on gross income, as you allude to, Jeff. It's based on discretionary. And so I think part of our task here is to like take that 23% of the earnings premiums and show what that actually means from discretionary income. And so we're working on that right now for a shorter policy piece.
Yeah,
Hopefully
just assume a 26% average tax rate across the country on combined federal, state, and local, and you'll give you an easy adjustment factor. I mean, it's rough.
That's helpful. That's helpful.
Hi, my name is Terry, and I'm with the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis. Thank you for this presentation. It was wonderful information. In my role, I'm beginning to research borrower default and repayment outcomes. And I'm especially interested in how race and field of study factor into those trends. So since you've noted that there's an uneven return for Black graduates in your research, has your work with the National Student Clearinghouse and the Credit Bureau data also looked at how default patterns vary, not only by race, but also by degree type or credentials with lower rates of return? And where do you see gaps in the research that could help practitioners like me better understand and respond to those disparities?
That's a great question. So we break out the debt adjusted earnings by race and ethnicity in our full paper. but we actually don't have a good sense of default within our current data and our current, in our current analysis. And I think like that is one of those places where definitely like need more research to do that. I think we actually had a guest speaker come last week who talked specifically about this, is the idea of like, a lot of times we present things in aggregate, but we know that folks are going to face, different risk factors in terms of completion and debt repayment and default. And like, how do we capture that and put that into a policy story, I think is really important. So short answer, we break out these earnings premiums by race and ethnicity and the debt adjusted earnings premiums. But as of right now, we don't have a great way of examining default, but I think that's something we hope to do. And I'm not sure, Guangli, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so I think the credit bureau data does have outcomes on default, but in aggregate, it's a pretty rare occurrence. So maybe in addition, we can also look. I mean, it's potentially we can look into this, but we haven't. That's the short answer. And then additionally, since that like default or bankruptcy is pretty rarely captured in the credit bureau data, and like other outcomes such as like short-term delinquency might also be interesting to look at in this setting.
Connie, I see a hand up.
Hi, so I have a question about in the credit bureau reporting data, are you able to observe like what occupations people are moving between, right? Because like some occupations, right, pay more than others, and then also like we know that like in general, like people often change jobs in order to be able to progress in their careers. And I think this is important for a lot of reasons, in part because like okay, like you get the degree and then you're able to transition to another job, right? So like a very common example is like people deciding if they want to go to grad school, right? Like depends on like do they like is grad school facilitating like them being able to acquire skills to move into that next job. Alternatively, if they are already in a job that sets them up for that next job, they may not necessarily need grad school or whatever education program, right? So like I am curious to know if you controlled for, if you tried to look at like, for example, like based on this current job, like, a previous job, like what was the likelihood of them pursuing another degree or another job? Assuming that like they're transitioning between jobs with similar skill profiles.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have the way we can have conceptualized it is we're looking at the industry of their employer. And so like that's one of our key outcomes is really like it's a focus on the industry of the employer, but that can mask the actual job. And I think as Jeff alluded to earlier, it can mask the actual skill in some ways. So I would say it's a not yet for us. Like, so we have been able to identify where they're working and what their employer and their industry, and we can look at the SOC codes from their education and do some of the crosswalks there. But I think there's a lot more to be done there in terms of like the actual position that someone is in. I'm not sure if Yoon or Guangli wants to add to that.
No, actually, that is a great question. So, yeah, so our original plan was to match CIP code from the education data and then the SOC code from the credit bureau. But the issue is those kind of SOC and the NIC code information are provided by employer, and we can easily like the capture the like the NIC code, which is the industry code from because we know who the employer are. But so the SOC code, which is about occupation, is not very well populated. So that is why we decided to use NIC code instead of the SOC. But yeah, to your point, yeah, SOC should be more like the accurate to like the capture the people's like the actual skills and then the job, so occupation. So, but yeah, that is our long hope and goal to use the SOC in that or instead of the NIC code. But thank you so much for your comment.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think like there's definitely some richness to the working with the individual states. I think from our side, and I think this was one kind of where we landed with some of the larger credit bureau data, is that we we can we can capture a broader, I guess like a broader sample, like working with individual states, because we do that on some different projects. And I think like it's a little bit just like the data sharing agreements with each individual state. And so I think there's just a trade-off there. Like we our data, we lose some of the things that individual states have that is really rich, but we're able to gain some broader generalization. And I think like for the question, especially the last question Jung was asking, which is, states are invested in education to some degree. Do those students, are they more likely to stay or leave? And I think that's where having some of this data in multiple states has helped us kind of understand this idea of like investing in talent that's more likely to stay or less likely to stay. And so I think it's a good point. We do lose a little bit of richness, but we gain a little bit on the external validity side. Job titles. No, but it's something that I think like we're trying to explore other ways of capturing again some of this like a little bit more fine grain things like job titles. I think are really important to help us understand, especially in terms of mismatch and things like that. All right. Well, we thank you for your time. We really appreciate the feedback here. This has been a great dialogue. So I appreciate all the questions and comments. We're going to continue this work. And so if you do have questions or comments, we have some of the links to the working papers here. We'll have some new pieces coming out soon and some broader outlets. And thanks to NCRN for hosting us. And thank you to the Lumina Foundation for supporting this work. So thank you all, and hope to see some of you soon.